The chains cut into Ilara's wrists as the cart rattled over broken stones, and she knew, without anyone telling her, that she was being taken somewhere she would never return from. The auction block still smelled of sweat and fear in her memory, the shouting voices, the coins passed from hand to hand, as if she were a sack of grain. She had been sold in less time than it took to haggle over a horse. Now she rode in silence, surrounded by armed men who did not look at her, toward a mountain that rose out of the mist like a dark warning. 3 days earlier, Ilara had still believed her life could be saved. Her father, once a respected nobleman of the eastern provinces, had fallen into debt after a failed harvest and worse decisions at the gambling tables of the capital. When the debt collectors came, they did not take furniture or land. They took her. She remembered the moment the contract was signed, her father's hand shaking, his eyes refusing to meet hers. She remembered thinking that surely someone would stop this, that the world could not be so cruel as to let a father trade his daughter for silence from his creditors. But the world was exactly that cruel, and now she was here, in a cart bound for a place called Castle Ashgrave, home of a king the guards refused to speak of except in lowered voices. The road grew steeper, pine trees gave way to jagged rock, and the sky darkened even though it was still afternoon, as if the mountain itself blocked out the sun. Ilara pulled her thin cloak tighter and studied the guards for any sign of what awaited her. One of them, a young man with a scar across his jaw, kept glancing at her with something like pity. She fixed her eyes on him until he looked away. "Where are you taking me?" she finally asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The scarred guard hesitated, then answered quietly, "To the king." "For what purpose?" He did not answer. None of them did. The cart rolled on, and Ilara stopped asking questions, because she understood that whatever waited for her at the top of that mountain, no one in this cart intended to warn her about it. By the time they reached the gates of Castle Ashgrave, the sun had vanished behind thick gray clouds, and torches lined the walls like flickering eyes. The castle itself was enormous, built from black stone that seemed to drink in whatever light touched it. Ilara had seen grand estates before, in her old life, when her family still had a name that meant something. But nothing had prepared her for the cold, watchful presence of this place. It did not look like a home. It looked like a fortress, built to keep something in, not to keep enemies out. The cart stopped in an inner courtyard, and Ilara was pulled down roughly by 2 guards she had not seen before. Her legs were stiff from days of travel, and she stumbled, catching herself against the cart's wheel. No one offered help. A woman stepped forward from the shadows of the entrance hall, dressed in the plain gray uniform of a castle servant, her face lined with years of hard work and harder secrets. "This is the new one?" the woman asked, studying Ilara the way a butcher studies livestock. "Yes, Mistress Beatrice," the scarred guard answered. "Bought at the Eastern Market 3 days past." Beatrice circled Ilara slowly, taking in her appearance, her posture, the defiant set of her jaw despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "She looks stronger than the last one," Beatrice muttered, almost to herself. "That might help her, or it might make things worse." "What do you mean?" Ilara asked, unable to stop herself. Beatrice's eyes flicked to her, surprised that the girl had spoken without permission. For a moment, something like sympathy crossed her weathered face. "You'll learn soon enough, child. Come, there is much to prepare before nightfall." Ilara was led through corridors lined with tapestries, so old their colors had faded into shadows of themselves. Portraits hung on the walls, and she noticed that many of them had been turned to face the wall, as if someone did not want to be watched by the past. Servants moved quickly and quietly, eyes down, voices hushed. There was a tension in the air that Ilara could feel pressing against her skin, though she could not yet name it. They arrived at a small chamber near the castle's western wing, sparse but clean, with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking the mountains. Beatrice instructed 2 younger servant girls to bring water and a change of clothes. "You will bathe and dress," Beatrice said. "Tonight you will be presented." "Presented to whom?" "To the king." Beatrice's voice dropped, and for the first time, Ilara heard real fear in it. "Do exactly as you are told. Do not run. Do not scream. Whatever happens, stay calm. Your life depends on it." "What is going to happen to me?" Ilara demanded, gripping the older woman's sleeve before she could turn away. Beatrice looked at her for a long moment, weighing whether to answer honestly. Finally she sighed. There is a curse on this castle, child. On the king himself. Every night, when darkness falls completely, he changes into something none of us can control. A beast, twisted by dark magic, born from a witch's fury many years ago. It has no mercy, no memory of who it was during the day. We have tried locks, chains, potions, prayers. Nothing holds him, nothing calms him. Ilara's blood went cold. And you are bringing me to him. Why? Because someone must be offered, Beatrice said, her voice barely above a whisper. It is the only way the castle survives each night without greater tragedy. A presence in his chambers, someone to draw his attention, to occupy the beast until dawn comes and the curse releases him. You are not the first girl brought here for this purpose. What happened to the others? Ilara's voice shook now, though she tried to keep it steady. Beatrice did not answer. She did not need to. The silence told Ilara everything. That evening, as the sun sank fully behind the mountain peaks, Ilara was dressed in a simple white gown and led through the castle's darkening halls by two guards who would not meet her eyes. The corridors grew colder the closer they came to the royal wing, and Ilara noticed that the torches here burned lower, as if even fire feared what lived behind these walls. They stopped before a set of heavy iron doors, reinforced with thick bolts and chains that hung loose, as though they had been broken and repaired many times. One guard knocked twice, then stepped back quickly, refusing to linger a moment longer than necessary. The door creaked open on its own, some mechanism inside releasing it, and Ilara was pushed gently but firmly across the threshold. The door slammed shut behind her, with a finality that echoed through the stone chamber. Inside, the room was vast, lit only by a dying fire in a massive hearth. Furniture had been shattered and pushed against the walls, as if cleared away to make space for something large and violent. Claw marks scored the stone floor in long, deep grooves. Ilara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her ribs, but she forced herself to stand still, to breathe evenly, to remember Beatrice's warning. Do not run, do not scream. A low growl rumbled from the far corner of the room, where shadows pooled thickest. Ilara turned toward the sound, and what she saw made every instinct in her body scream to flee. A figure crouched there, larger than any man, its shoulders hunched and powerful, its silhouette wrong in ways she could not fully understand in the dim light. Two eyes glowed faintly amber in the darkness, fixed directly on her. She had expected terror to consume her completely. Instead, something strange happened. As she stared into those glowing eyes, she felt not just fear, but a strange, aching sorrow, as if she were looking at something trapped rather than something monstrous. She did not know why, but the thought steadied her more than any warning could have. The beast rose slowly to its full height, easily twice as tall as any man she had ever known, its form covered in dark fur and rough, scarred skin. Its hands ended in claws long enough to tear through stone. It took one heavy step toward her, then another, and Ilara felt every muscle in her body urge her backward. But she remembered the servant girls who had come before her, whose fates no one would speak of, and she understood, with sudden clarity, that running would only end things faster. So she stood still. The beast stopped only a few feet away, towering over her, its breath hot and ragged. She could smell smoke and something metallic beneath it. Its glowing eyes studied her, searching for the fear it clearly expected, the fear that had driven every other offering in this room to scream, to flee, to beg. Ilara gave it none of that. She lifted her chin instead, meeting its gaze directly, though her whole body trembled with the effort. I am not going to run, she said quietly, her voice cracking despite her resolve. You can do whatever you intend to do. But I will not run from you. The beast tilted its massive head, an almost human gesture of confusion, as if her words meant something it had not expected to hear. It raised one clawed hand toward her, slowly, and Ilara closed her eyes, bracing herself for whatever came next. But the blow never landed. Instead, the beast paused, its claws hovering inches from her shoulder, trembling with some internal struggle Ilara could not comprehend. A sound rose from its chest, not quite a growl, not quite a groan, something caught between rage and pain. Then, unexpectedly, it lowered its hand and stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the room, as if her stillness had thrown it into confusion, rather than provoking its violence. Elara remained standing exactly where she was, too stunned to move, her heart still hammering, disbelief flooding through her. She did not understand what had just happened, only that she was, impossibly, still alive. The beast paced the far side of the room for what felt like hours, occasionally letting out low, tortured sounds, but it did not approach her again. Elara sank slowly to the floor, exhaustion and shock finally overwhelming her, though she never let her eyes leave the creature entirely. She watched it as much as it seemed to watch her, two trapped beings sharing a single dark room, waiting for a dawn that felt impossibly far away. At some point during that long, silent night, Elara allowed herself to close her eyes, not from safety, but from sheer exhaustion. When she woke, pale morning light filtered through a high window, and the room was empty except for her. The beast was gone. In its place, faint scratches on the stone floor, and a strange, unsettling calm. The iron doors opened, and Beatrice rushed in, followed by several guards, all of them staring at Elara as if she were something impossible. Elara looked up at them, her body aching from the cold stone floor, and asked the only question that mattered. Did I survive? Beatrice's face was pale with disbelief. You did more than survive, child. No one has ever survived a full night in that room before. Not once. Not in all the years since the curse began. Elara pushed herself to her feet, unsteady but alive, and looked around at the ruined furniture, the claw marks, the evidence of countless nights of violence that had somehow, this time, spared her. She did not understand why. She only knew that something had changed, both in that room and within herself, and that whatever waited for her now in Castle Ashgrave would be unlike anything she had imagined when the cart first carried her through those dark iron gates. As the guards led her away to be fed and given proper rest, Elara caught sight of a tall figure watching from a distant balcony above the courtyard, a man with dark hair and haunted eyes, dressed in the fine but simple clothing of nobility. He did not speak, did not move, only watched her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. She realized, with a jolt of understanding, that she was looking at the king himself, awake now in his human form, carrying no memory perhaps of the creature he had been the night before, yet somehow aware that something between them had shifted forever. Neither of them knew it yet, but the first thread of a bond had just been woven, one that would soon challenge everything the kingdom believed about curses, about monsters, and about the girl who had refused to run. Elara woke the next morning in a proper bed for the first time since her capture, though her body still ached from the cold stone floor of the previous night. Sunlight streamed through a narrow window, and for a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the auction block, the cart, the glowing amber eyes in the darkness. Then memory returned all at once, and she sat up sharply, her heart pounding. Beatrice entered without knocking, carrying a tray of bread, cheese, and warm broth. She set it down on the small table beside the bed and studied Elara with an expression the girl could not quite read, something between curiosity and caution. Eat, Beatrice said simply. You will need your strength. For what? Elara asked, though she suspected she already knew part of the answer. Am I to face him again tonight? That is not for me to say. The king has summoned you. This morning, not tonight. Beatrice's voice carried a note of surprise, as if this itself was unusual. No offering has ever been called before him in daylight, not once, in all the years I have served here. Elara's stomach tightened, though she forced herself to eat, knowing Beatrice was right about needing strength. Whatever waited for her, facing it on an empty stomach would serve no purpose. As she ate, she studied the older woman more closely, noticing the way her hands trembled slightly, the deep lines around her eyes that spoke of years spent in a castle under a terrible shadow. How long have you served the king? Elara asked. Beatrice hesitated, then answered. Since before the curse. I remember him as a young man, before the witch's fury changed everything. He was different then, kind, even. It is hard to reconcile that memory with what he has become at night. What happened? Why was he cursed? Beatrice glanced toward the door, lowering her voice further. That is a story with many versions, child, and none of them paint anyone in a good light. I suggest you ask the king himself, if you dare, though I would not recommend bringing it up too quickly. Some wounds do not like to be touched by strangers. When the meal was finished, Beatrice led Alara through the castle's daylight corridors, which looked entirely different from the shadowed halls of the night before. Sunlight caught on dust motes drifting through the air, and Alara noticed servants moving with slightly more ease now, though the tension never fully left their shoulders. They passed through a long gallery lined with windows overlooking the mountains, and Alara paused despite herself, struck by the raw beauty of the view, jagged peaks capped with snow, forests stretching toward a horizon she could barely imagine reaching. "Keep moving," Beatrice murmured, though not unkindly. "The king does not like to be kept waiting." They arrived at a set of tall wooden doors, far less intimidating than the iron ones from the previous night, though Alara's pulse still quickened as a guard pushed them open. Inside was a study, warm and lined with books, a fire crackling in a modest hearth. Sitting behind a heavy desk was the man Alara had glimpsed on the balcony, the king himself. Though seeing him now, in full daylight and at close range, she was struck by how ordinary he appeared. Dark hair, tired eyes, a face that might have been handsome if it were not so deeply marked by exhaustion and something like grief. He looked up as she entered, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Beatrice bowed and withdrew, leaving Alara alone with the king for the first time. "You may sit," he said finally, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. His voice was quiet, controlled, nothing like the growls and roars she had heard the night before, yet something in his tone carried the same weight of restrained power. Alara sat carefully, keeping her spine straight, refusing to let him see how her hands trembled in her lap. "I am told you survived the night," he said, fully, without incident. "I am told the same thing," Alara replied, "though I confess, I do not understand why." The king studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as though looking for some clue he had missed. "Neither do I. I have no memory of what happens when the transformation takes me. I only know the aftermath, the destruction, the reports from my staff about what was done, who was hurt, who did not survive." His jaw tightened. "This morning, for the first time in longer than I care to remember, I woke to a report that said nothing had happened, that the girl brought before me had simply remained, unharmed." "I did not run," Alara said quietly. "I was told that running was dangerous. So I stood still." "Many have stood still before," the king said, his voice carrying a bitter edge. "Stillness has never mattered before. Fear does not need movement to invite violence." Alara considered this, unsure how to respond. She thought back to the strange sorrow she had felt looking into the beast's eyes, the sense that she was looking at something trapped rather than something purely monstrous. She decided, cautiously, to share this. "I did not only feel fear," she admitted. "I felt something else too. Sadness, perhaps, as though whatever stood before me did not want to be what it was." The king's expression shifted, something flickering behind his tired eyes, though he quickly masked it. "That is a generous interpretation of a creature that has killed. Perhaps," Alara said. "Or perhaps it is simply what I saw." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not entirely uncomfortable. The king rose from his desk and walked to the window, staring out at the mountains much as Alara had done in the gallery earlier. "My name is Kale," he said finally, without turning around. "Though I imagine you already know that," whispered among the servants along with every other detail of my curse. "Alara," she offered in return, feeling it strange to introduce herself so formally to a man who held her life in his hands, quite literally, each night. "Alara," Kale repeated, testing the name as though it meant something. He turned back to face her. "I do not know what changed last night, and I do not wish to build false hope on a single incident that may never repeat itself. But I find myself curious, against my better judgment, to understand what makes you different from those who came before." "Perhaps nothing," Alara said honestly. "Perhaps I was simply fortunate." "Perhaps," Kale agreed, though his tone suggested he did not fully believe it. "Regardless, I am told you will remain here, at the castle. Whether you are called upon again tonight is not yet decided." In the meantime, you will not be treated as you were treated before arriving here. You survived something no one else has survived. That earns a measure of respect, even in a place cursed as thoroughly as this one." Ilara nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "May I ask a question, my king?" "You may." "How did this curse come to be?" "Beatrice would not tell me, only that I should ask you directly, if I dared." Kale's expression darkened, and for a moment, Ilara feared she had overstepped, but he did not dismiss her. Instead, he returned to his desk, sitting slowly, as though the weight of the memory itself was a physical burden. "Many years ago," he began, "before I became king, my father ruled this land with a cruelty that history has already begun to forget, though the people who lived through it never will. Among those he wronged was a woman, a healer with knowledge of old magic, whom he accused unjustly of crimes she did not commit. She was punished severely, her family destroyed, though the truth of her innocence came to light only after the damage was done. When I took the throne, I tried to make amends, to right the wrongs of my father's reign, but amends came too late for her. She had already sworn vengeance, not against my father, who had died by then, but against the bloodline itself, against me. So the curse was never truly yours to bear," Ilara said softly. "Curses do not concern themselves with fairness," Kale replied, bitterness sharpening his voice. "She placed it upon me directly, binding my nights to the beast you saw, a creature born from rage and grief, uncontrollable, merciless. I have spent years searching for a way to break it, consulting scholars, priests, other practitioners of magic. All of them tell me the same thing, that the curse can only be lifted by a very specific condition, one I have never been able to fulfill." "What condition?" Ilara asked, though something in Kale's expression told her he was reluctant to answer. "It does not matter," he said, closing the conversation with a finality that discouraged further questions. "What matters now is understanding why you survived when others did not. If there is a chance, however small, that it was not mere luck, I intend to explore it fully. For the safety of my kingdom, and for the sake of ending this curse once and for all." Ilara sensed there was more to what he had not said, some crucial piece of the puzzle he was keeping deliberately hidden. But she did not press further, recognizing the exhaustion and pain behind his controlled expression. Instead, she simply nodded, accepting for now the boundaries of what he was willing to share. "Then I will do what I can," she said, "though I do not yet understand what that means." "Nor do I," Kale admitted, something almost like a smile touching the corner of his mouth, quickly hidden again. "But I suspect we are both about to find out." As Beatrice led Ilara back through the castle's daylight halls, the older woman glanced at her with new curiosity. "The king rarely speaks so long with anyone," she said. "Whatever passed between you in that room, it has changed something. I can see it in his eyes, even from a distance." Ilara said nothing, turning Kale's story over in her mind. The tragedy of a curse inherited, rather than earned. The desperate search for a cure that had eluded him for years. She thought of the beast's hesitation the night before, the trembling claw that had stopped just short of striking her, and wondered, with a mixture of fear and fragile hope, whether she truly held some key to breaking a curse that had haunted this castle for far longer than her own short life. That evening, as the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains once more, a summons arrived, carried by the same scarred guard who had first brought her to the castle. She was to return to the king's chambers again, as darkness fell, to see whether the events of the previous night would repeat themselves, or whether they had been nothing more than a single strange exception in a long history of tragedy. Ilara dressed once more in white, her hands steadier this time than they had been before, though her heart still pounded with the same uncertainty. Whatever waited for her behind those heavy iron doors, she resolved to face it exactly as she had the night before, without running, without screaming, standing firm against whatever the darkness chose to bring. The iron doors closed behind Ilara once again, sealing her inside the same vast chamber, the fire in the hearth already burning low, casting long shadows across the broken furniture and scarred stone floor. This time, she was not entirely unprepared. She knew the sounds to expect, the low growl rising from the darkness, the shift in the air that signaled the transformation had begun. Still, knowing did not make the moment any less terrifying when it finally arrived. The change came suddenly, a violent, guttural sound tearing through the silence as Kale's form twisted and grew, bones shifting beneath skin that darkened and thickened into something far less human. Ilara had not witnessed the transformation itself the night before, only its aftermath, and watching it happen now made her stomach turn with a mixture of horror and pity. Whatever pain accompanied this change, it was clearly immense, etched into every strained movement, every choked, agonized sound that escaped the creature's throat. When it was over, the beast stood before her once more, taller than any man, its amber eyes finding hers immediately across the darkened room. Ilara held her ground, remembering her resolve, though her breath came shallow and quick. "I am here again," she said quietly, her voice steadier than she expected. "As I was before." The beast tilted its head, the same gesture of confusion she had noticed the previous night, as if her calm presence puzzled it in ways violence never had. It took a slow step forward, then another, until it stood close enough that Ilara could feel the heat radiating from its massive frame. She forced herself not to flinch. This time, instead of raising a claw toward her, the beast lowered itself slightly, bringing its head closer to her level, studying her with an intensity that felt almost searching, as though it were trying to remember something just beyond its reach. Ilara held perfectly still, watching the amber eyes flicker with something that looked, impossibly, like recognition. "Do you know me?" she whispered, unsure if the creature could even understand words, let alone answer them. "From last night?" The beast let out a low sound, not quite a growl, something closer to a question, and Ilara felt a strange courage rise within her. Slowly, carefully, she extended her hand, palm open, the way she might approach a frightened animal, rather than a monstrous creature, capable of tearing her apart in an instant. Every instinct screamed against the gesture, but something deeper, something she could not fully name, told her it was the right thing to do. The beast froze, staring at her outstretched hand, as though it were something entirely unfamiliar. Long seconds passed in unbearable tension. Then, slowly, it lowered its massive head and pressed its snout gently against her palm, a gesture so unexpectedly tender that tears sprang unbidden to Ilara's eyes. "There," she murmured, her voice trembling now, though not from fear. "You are not what they say you are. Not entirely." The beast remained still beneath her touch, for what felt like an eternity, its breathing slowing, the tension in its powerful frame easing, bit by bit. Ilara did not know how long they stayed like that, the girl and the beast, connected by nothing more than a single point of contact, and a fragile, unspoken trust. Eventually, the creature pulled back, retreating to the far corner of the room as it had the night before, though this time it settled onto the floor rather than pacing restlessly through the darkness. Ilara sank down as well, keeping a respectful distance, but no longer huddled in fear against the wall. She watched the beast through the dim firelight, noticing details she had missed before, the scars crossing its shoulders, the way its claws, though fearsome, moved with a strange, careful precision when it was not driven to violence. She wondered how much of Kale remained within this creature, whether some fragment of his mind lingered beneath the rage, watching, waiting, as trapped by the transformation as everyone else in the castle. The night passed slowly, but without incident, and when dawn finally broke, spilling pale light through the high window, Ilara found herself exhausted but unharmed once more. The beast had drifted into something resembling sleep in the final hours before sunrise, and as the transformation reversed itself, Ilara watched from a careful distance as Kale's human form returned, curled on the stone floor, breathing heavily, drenched in sweat. She did not approach him immediately, unsure whether he would remember anything of the night, unsure how he would react to finding her there. When his eyes finally opened, disoriented and pained, he seemed startled to see her sitting nearby, calm and composed. "You are still here," he said, his voice hoarse. "I am," Ilara replied simply. Kale pushed himself upright slowly, wincing at what must have been the lingering pain of the transformation. He studied her carefully, as though searching for injuries she might be hiding. "Nothing happened again?" "Nothing violent," Ilara said, "though something did happen." She told him then, carefully, about the beast's hesitation, its confusion, the way it had lowered its head to her outstretched hand, as though seeking comfort rather than conflict. Kale listened in silence, his expression unreadable, though his hands clenched tightly against his knees as she spoke. "I do not remember any of it," he admitted when she finished. "I never do. I only wake to reports, to consequences. To hear that something gentle happened instead, twice now, it is difficult to believe." "Perhaps it is worth investigating further," Ilara suggested carefully, rather than dismissing it. Kale was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his own hands, as though they belonged to a stranger. "I have spent years believing there was nothing left in me worth saving, once the transformation takes hold. That whatever compassion or reason I possess during the day is entirely absent at night, replaced by something purely destructive. If what you are telling me is true, if some part of that creature responds to you specifically, it raises questions I am almost afraid to ask." "What kind of questions?" Ilara asked. "Whether the curse itself is beginning to weaken," Kale said quietly, "or whether you are simply the first person willing to reach toward it instead of away from it." Word of the second peaceful night spread quickly through the castle, carried in hushed, disbelieving whispers among the servants. Beatrice, when she came to collect Ilara that morning, could barely contain her astonishment, though she quickly masked it behind her usual composed demeanor. "Twice now," she murmured, almost to herself, as she led Ilara back toward her chambers. "In all my years here, I have never witnessed anything like this. Perhaps it means something is changing," Ilara said, though she herself did not fully understand what. "Perhaps," Beatrice agreed, though her tone carried caution. "But be careful, child. Not everyone in this castle will welcome such change. There are those who benefit from the king's curse remaining exactly as it is, who fear what might happen to their own positions, should it ever be broken." Ilara frowned, considering this warning carefully. Who would benefit from the king's suffering continuing? Beatrice glanced around the empty corridor before answering, her voice dropping to barely more than a whisper. "Lord Varric, the king's chief advisor, has held significant power during these cursed years. Guiding decisions the king himself is often too exhausted or distracted to manage personally. Should the curse break, should the king regain his full strength and clarity, Varric's influence would diminish considerably. I would not put it past him to see any progress you make as a threat rather than a blessing." The warning settled uneasily in Ilara's chest, a reminder that whatever fragile progress she had made with Kale and the beast within him, it existed within a castle full of hidden currents and dangerous ambitions. She thought of the man she had glimpsed occasionally in the corridors, sharp-eyed and always watching, always calculating, and wondered how much of what happened within these walls he already knew, and how much he intended to do about it. That evening, as she prepared once more for the coming darkness, Ilara resolved to be more careful, more observant of the political undercurrents swirling around her. She was no longer merely a slave girl, offered up to appease a monster. She had become, whether she wished it or not, a piece in a much larger game, one where the stakes included not only her own life, but the fate of a king trapped between two selves, and a kingdom waiting to see which one would ultimately prevail. As night fell and the familiar iron doors closed behind her once again, Ilara steadied herself for whatever the darkness would bring, carrying with her now not only her own fragile courage, but the weight of secrets and dangers she was only beginning to understand. Weeks passed, and a strange new rhythm settled over Castle Ashgrave. Each night, Ilara entered the king's chambers as darkness fell, and each night, the beast grew calmer in her presence, more willing to lower its guard, more responsive to her quiet words and steady patience. The servants began to whisper of her, not as an offering, but as something closer to a miracle. A girl who had somehow found a way to reach the untouchable creature that had haunted their king for years. During the days, Ilara found herself increasingly drawn into conversation with Kale, their morning meetings growing longer, less formal, though never entirely comfortable given the strange circumstances that bound them together. She learned of his childhood before the curse, memories of a mother who had died when he was young, a father whose cruelty had shaped the kingdom in ways Kale had spent years trying to undo. She learned of his fears, carefully guarded beneath a composed exterior, that he would never find a way to break the curse, that he was doomed to spend eternity as two separate beings, neither one whole. In turn, Kale learned of Alara's own history, the noble family fallen into ruin, the father who had sold her without meeting her eyes, the long journey through markets and auction blocks that had led her, eventually, to this mountain fortress. He listened with genuine attention, his expression darkening with something like anger on her behalf, when she described the moment of her sale. "Your father should have found another way," Kale said one morning, his voice tight with restrained fury. "No debt is worth trading away a daughter." "Perhaps," Alara replied, though the old wound still ached when she spoke of it. "But dwelling on what should have happened does little to change what did happen. I have learned to focus instead on what comes next." Kale studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering behind his tired eyes. "You possess a remarkable strength, Alara. I do not think you fully realize how remarkable it is." Their growing closeness did not go unnoticed within the castle. Beatrice observed it with a mixture of hope and worry, aware of the dangers such an attachment might invite in a court already tense with hidden ambitions. Other servants whispered among themselves, some hopeful that Alara's presence might finally offer some relief from the curse that had shadowed their lives for so long, others fearful of what change might mean for the fragile order they had grown accustomed to. Lord Varric, in particular, watched the developing situation with sharp, calculating eyes. He attended the king's morning meetings with increasing frequency, always polite, always deferential in his address. Yet Alara noticed the way his gaze lingered on her with something colder than simple curiosity. She mentioned this to Beatrice one evening, seeking guidance from the older woman's years of experience navigating the castle's political currents. "He sees you as a threat," Beatrice confirmed, her voice low despite the empty corridor around them. "A threat to the influence he has built over these cursed years. As long as the king remains weakened, distracted by the burden of his curse, Varric's counsel carries more weight than it otherwise would. Should that curse ever break, should the king regain his full strength and clarity of purpose, Varric's power would diminish considerably. He will not welcome that outcome easily." "What can he do to stop it?" Alara asked, unease coiling in her stomach. "I do not know," Beatrice admitted, "but men like Varric rarely act without a plan already in motion. Watch yourself carefully, child. Trust few people within these walls." Alara took the warning seriously, though she found herself uncertain how to act on it beyond simple vigilance. She continued her nightly visits to Kale's chambers, continued building the fragile trust between herself and the beast that emerged each evening, and continued her growing friendship, if that was even the right word for it, with the king himself during the daylight hours. One evening, as she entered the familiar chamber and the transformation began, Alara noticed something different in the beast's demeanor, almost immediately. Where before its eyes had shown confusion or searching curiosity, tonight there was something closer to recognition, an ease in its posture that suggested the creature had, in some fundamental way, begun to accept her presence as something expected rather than surprising. "Good evening," she said softly, settling onto the floor near the fire, close enough now that the beast did not need to cross the room to reach her. The creature approached slowly, settling beside her with a heaviness that shook the stone floor slightly, its massive form curling protectively around where she sat. Alara reached out without hesitation now, resting her hand against its dark fur, feeling the steady rhythm of its breathing beneath her palm. "I wonder," she said quietly, more to herself than to the creature, "how much of Kale remains within you. Whether you can hear me at all, or whether this closeness means nothing beyond simple animal instinct." The beast let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a sigh, and shifted slightly closer to her, as though seeking reassurance it could not otherwise express. Alara smiled despite herself, a small, genuine expression of warmth, in a place that had known so little of it for so long. They remained like that for hours, the girl and the beast, until exhaustion finally claimed her, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep against its warm, steady form. When she woke at dawn, the transformation had already reversed, and she found herself resting instead against Kale's human shoulder, his arm curled protectively around her, both of them having fallen asleep in the same position they had shared through the night. Kale stirred first, his eyes opening slowly, disoriented as always by the transition. When he realized their position, he tensed immediately, moving to pull away, though Alara caught his arm gently before he could withdraw completely. "It is all right," she said softly. "We fell asleep. Nothing more." "I could have hurt you," Kale said, his voice rough with lingering exhaustion and something like fear. "Even in sleep, the beast within me is unpredictable. I should not have allowed this closeness to develop so quickly." "But you did not hurt me," Ilara pointed out gently. "Not last night, not any night since I arrived. Perhaps it is time to trust that this progress is real, rather than fearing it will inevitably fail." Kale looked at her for a long moment, something vulnerable flickering behind his usual composed exterior. "I have spent so many years believing myself incapable of anything but destruction once darkness falls. It is difficult to trust otherwise, even when the evidence stands directly before me." "Then trust the evidence," Ilara said simply. "Trust what you can see, rather than what you have always feared." As the days continued to pass, the bond between Ilara and Kale deepened further, both during the daylight hours of careful conversation and the nighttime hours of quiet companionship with the beast. The castle's atmosphere began to shift subtly, servants moving with slightly less tension, whispers carrying cautious hope rather than familiar dread. Even Beatrice, normally so guarded in her expressions, allowed herself small smiles when she observed the growing peace that had settled over the once turbulent nights. But not everyone welcomed this change. Lord Varric's visits to the king's study grew more frequent, his tone during their conversations carrying an edge of concern that Ilara found increasingly difficult to trust as genuine. She began to notice him watching her more closely during her rare appearances in the castle's public halls, his calculating gaze following her movements with an intensity that made her skin crawl. One afternoon, as she walked alone through the castle's eastern gallery, lost in thought about the previous night's quiet hours with the beast, Varric appeared suddenly from a side corridor, blocking her path with deliberate casualness. "Lady Ilara," he said, his voice smooth and pleasant, though something calculating lurked beneath the surface courtesy. "I have heard remarkable things about your influence over our king's nightly affliction." "I do what I can to help," Ilara replied carefully, unwilling to reveal more than necessary to a man Beatrice had warned her so seriously against. Of course," Varric said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Though I must say, it is unusual for a girl of your background to find herself in such a position of influence. One might almost suspect ambition beyond simple survival." "I have no ambitions beyond surviving each day as it comes," Ilara said, keeping her voice steady despite the unease building in her chest. "A wise philosophy," Varric replied, though his tone suggested he did not entirely believe her. "Though I would caution you, my lady, that survival in this castle depends greatly on remembering one's place. The king's affections, however genuine they may currently appear, are notoriously changeable. I would hate to see you invest too heavily in a position that could shift without warning." The threat, thinly veiled beneath polite words, sent a chill through Ilara's spine. She met Varric's gaze steadily, refusing to let him see how deeply his words had unsettled her. "I appreciate your concern, Lord Varric, though I believe I am capable of navigating my own position within this castle." "Of course you are," Varric said, stepping aside finally to let her pass, though his eyes followed her the entire length of the corridor. "Of course you are." As Ilara continued on her way, her heart still pounding from the encounter, she understood with growing certainty that Beatrice's warnings had been well-founded. Whatever fragile peace she had built with Kale and the beast within him, it existed under the constant threat of those who stood to lose from its success. The road ahead, she realized, would require more than simple courage and patience. It would require careful navigation of a political landscape as treacherous, in its own way, as the beast's chamber had once seemed on that very first terrifying night. Long after the encounter with Lord Varric, Ilara found herself unable to shake the unease his words had planted within her. She said nothing of it to Kale during their morning conversations, unwilling to burden him with suspicions she could not yet prove, but she began paying closer attention to the currents of power moving through the castle, watching for signs of the danger Beatrice had warned her about. It was during one such quiet afternoon of observation that Ilara made her way to the castle's forbidden archive, a chamber Beatrice had mentioned only once, in passing, warning her never to enter without permission. The archive housed centuries of records, old spellbooks, and accounts of the kingdom's darker history. Information the current administration preferred remain hidden from common knowledge. Ilara had thought little of the warning at the time, but as her curiosity about the curse itself grew, she found herself increasingly drawn to the possibility that answers might exist within those locked shelves. She waited until the castle settled into its quiet afternoon lull, when most servants retreated to their own tasks, and the guards grew lax in their patrols. Using a key she had noticed Beatrice misplaced during a moment of distraction days earlier, Ilara slipped into the archive unnoticed, closing the heavy door behind her with careful silence. The chamber was dim, lit only by narrow windows near the ceiling, dust thick in the air, undisturbed for what looked like years. Shelves lined every wall, packed with books and scrolls in various states of decay. Ilara moved carefully through the narrow aisles, searching for anything that might reference the curse, the witch who had cast it, or the specific conditions required to break it. After what felt like hours of careful searching, she finally found a promising volume tucked into a shadowed corner, its spine cracked with age, the title barely legible beneath layers of dust. She wiped it clean and opened it carefully, finding within its pages detailed accounts of curses cast during the era of Kale's father's reign, including, she realized with growing excitement, references to the very witch Kale had described. The book detailed the witch's name, Morwenna, a healer of considerable skill and knowledge in old magic, wrongly accused and severely punished for crimes she never committed. The account confirmed everything Kale had told her, though it offered additional details he had either not known or chosen not to share. According to the text, curses of this nature, born from genuine grief and betrayed trust, could only be broken under very specific conditions, tied intrinsically to the nature of the original wrong. Ilara read further, her heart pounding as she uncovered a passage describing the exact terms of such curses. The passage explained that a curse, rooted in stolen trust and forced suffering, could only be lifted through freely given love, not born from duty or obligation, but chosen entirely without coercion by both parties involved. The beast, the text explained, would need to recognize and accept genuine affection freely offered, while the human heart of the cursed individual would need to release itself fully from guilt and fear, opening instead to trust and vulnerability. The realization struck Ilara with sudden, overwhelming clarity. If this text was accurate, if the curse upon Kale truly required this specific condition, then the growing bond between herself and both aspects of the king, the man and the beast, might hold the very key to ending his suffering entirely. But the thought brought with it equal parts hope and fear. Love freely chosen could not be forced or manufactured for the sake of breaking a curse. If either of them approached their growing feelings with calculation, rather than genuine emotion, the curse would likely remain unbroken, or worse, might strengthen in response to the attempted deception. Ilara closed the book carefully, her mind racing with the implications of what she had discovered. She knew she needed to share this information with Kale, yet she hesitated, uncertain how he would react to learning that breaking his curse depended on something as fragile and unpredictable as genuine love, particularly love shared with a girl who had arrived at his castle in chains, sold like property to serve as an offering to his darker nature. As she moved to return the book to its shelf, careful to leave no trace of her intrusion, the archive door creaked open behind her. Ilara froze, her heart leaping into her throat, as Lord Varric stepped into the dim chamber, his expression carrying a mixture of surprise and cold calculation. "Lady Ilara," he said, his voice smooth despite the obvious tension in the room, "I did not expect to find you here. This chamber is not meant for casual visitors." "I was simply curious," Ilara said, forcing calm into her voice, despite her racing pulse. "About the history of this castle." Varric's eyes flicked to the book still held loosely in her hands, and something sharp and knowing crossed his features. "Curious about our king's curse, perhaps. An understandable interest, given your unique position here. Though I wonder what you hope to gain from such knowledge." "I hope only to understand," Ilara said carefully, replacing the book on its shelf with deliberate calm. "Surely that is not a crime." "Knowledge is rarely a crime in itself," Varric agreed, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But knowledge in the wrong hands, wielded for the wrong purposes, can become quite dangerous indeed. I would advise caution, my lady, in how you choose to use whatever you have learned here today. The threat, though couched in polite language, was unmistakable. Ilara met his gaze steadily, refusing to let him see the fear building within her chest. I have no intention of causing harm, Lord Varric, only of helping where I am able. Of course, Varric said, though his smile carried no warmth. We shall see, in time, whether your intentions align with your actions. The king's welfare is a matter of great importance to this entire kingdom, Lady Ilara. I would hate to see it compromised by well-meaning, but ultimately misguided interference. He stepped aside finally, allowing her to pass, though his eyes tracked her movement across the chamber with unsettling intensity. As Ilara made her way back through the castle's daylight corridors, her mind raced with the implications of Varric's warning. He knew now that she had accessed information about the curse, information that could threaten his careful position of influence should the king's affliction ever truly end. She understood, with growing certainty, that whatever plans he had been quietly developing to protect his own power would now accelerate, driven by the very real threat her discovery represented. That evening, as she prepared for her nightly visit to Kael's chambers, Ilara wrestled with whether to share what she had learned. The temptation to keep the information private, to protect the fragile bond growing between herself and Kael from becoming complicated by expectation or pressure, warred against her sense that he deserved to know the truth about his own curse, regardless of how difficult that truth might be to hear. In the end, she decided to wait, at least a little longer, until she could be certain the information was accurate, until she could better understand her own feelings before risking the added weight of knowing that those feelings might hold the power to reshape a kingdom's future. She told herself this was wisdom, patience born from caution rather than fear, but some quiet part of her recognized the hesitation for what it truly was, uncertainty about whether what she felt toward Kael and toward the beast that shared his soul was genuine enough to matter, strong enough to break a curse that had resisted every other attempt at salvation for years. As the iron doors closed behind her once more, sealing her into the familiar chamber with its dying fire and scarred stone floor, Ilara pushed aside her uncertainty and focused instead on the moment before her. Whatever the future held, whatever dangers Lord Varric's growing suspicion might bring, tonight she would simply be present, offering whatever comfort and connection she could to the creature waiting in the shadows, trusting that understanding would come, in time, alongside the courage needed to act on it. The transformation began as it always did, violent and pained, and when it finished, the beast turned toward her immediately, its amber eyes finding hers with an ease that spoke of growing familiarity and trust. Ilara smiled softly, extending her hand, as she had grown accustomed to doing, and the beast crossed the room to meet her, settling beside her with a gentleness that still, after so many nights, managed to surprise her. "We have much to discover still," she whispered, resting her hand against its dark fur, "but we will discover it together." Outside the chamber, unseen and unheard, Lord Varric stood in the shadowed corridor, having followed at a careful distance, his expression grim with calculation as he considered the threat this growing bond represented to everything he had worked so carefully to build during the long years of the king's affliction. Whatever plans had been forming in his mind since his encounter with Ilara in the archive solidified now into something more concrete, more dangerous, as he turned and disappeared into the darkness of the castle, already scheming the next move in a game far more treacherous than Ilara yet fully understood. In the days that followed her encounter with Lord Varric in the archive, Ilara noticed subtle changes rippling through the castle, small enough that she might have dismissed them as coincidence had her instincts not already been sharpened by warning. Guards who had once greeted her with cautious respect now watched her with wary distance. Servants who had grown accustomed to whispering hopeful words about her influence over the king's curse now fell silent whenever she approached, their eyes darting away as though afraid to be seen speaking with her at all. Beatrice noticed the shift as well, her weathered face carrying deeper lines of worry each time she visited Ilara's chambers. "Varric has been busy," she confided one morning, her voice barely above a whisper, despite the empty room around them. "Spreading doubts among the staff, questioning your motives, suggesting that your influence over the king serves purposes beyond simple compassion." "What kind of purposes?" Ilara asked, though dread already coiled in her stomach at the implication. Ambition, Beatrice said grimly. He suggests you seek to use your position with the king to elevate yourself beyond your station, perhaps even to claim a place at his side that a former slave has no right to claim. It is a dangerous accusation, child, particularly in a court already uneasy about the unprecedented nature of your relationship with him. Alara felt anger flare within her chest, sharp and immediate. I have sought nothing beyond helping him survive his own curse. If anything, it is Varric who benefits from suspicion and division, who fears losing his own influence, should that curse ever break. I know that, Beatrice said gently, and I believe you know that as well. But belief and proof are different things. And Varric has spent years building alliances within this court, connections that will not easily be swayed by simple denial. You must be careful, Alara, more careful than you have been. The warning settled heavily over Alara as she continued through her days, increasingly aware of the watchful eyes tracking her movements, the whispered conversations that fell silent at her approach. She began to understand, with growing unease, that the peaceful nights she had built with Kale's beast, the tentative trust growing between herself and the king during their daylight conversations, existed now within a court, actively working against their success. Despite the mounting tension, the bond between Alara and the beast continued to deepen with each passing night. What had once been fragile trust, built moment by careful moment, now felt almost natural, an ease of companionship that neither of them questioned any longer. The beast would greet her now with something almost like eagerness, settling beside her without hesitation, resting its massive head in her lap as she spoke softly about her day, about her hopes, about fears she was only beginning to voice aloud. I worry, she admitted one night, running her fingers absently through the dark fur along the creature's shoulder, that others in this castle do not wish to see this curse broken, that they see my presence here as a threat rather than a blessing. The beast made a low, questioning sound, tilting its head to study her with those familiar amber eyes. Lord Varric, specifically, Alara continued, finding it strangely easy to voice her concerns to this creature who could not judge or repeat her words to others. He has power now, influence over your king's decisions during these years of affliction. Should the curse break, should Kale regain his full strength and clarity, that influence would diminish. I fear what lengths he might go to in order to prevent that outcome. The beast shifted closer, pressing its head gently against her shoulder in a gesture that felt, impossibly, like comfort offered in return for her own. Alara smiled despite the weight of her worries, grateful for this strange, unexpected companionship that had grown from such violent beginnings into something she could only describe as genuine affection. I have discovered something, she continued, deciding finally to voice the discovery she had kept private since her visit to the archive. About the nature of your curse, I found records suggesting it can only be broken through love freely given, not born from obligation or calculation, but chosen genuinely by both hearts involved. The beast went very still beneath her hand, its amber eyes fixed intently on her face, as though it understood far more of her words than she had expected. I do not know if what I feel toward you, toward Kale, is strong enough or genuine enough to matter, Alara admitted softly, but I know that it exists, growing more certain with each night we share. Whether it holds the power to break your curse, I cannot say. But I no longer wish to hide it, whatever consequences that honesty might bring. The beast made a sound unlike any she had heard from it before, something closer to a sigh than a growl, and leaned into her touch with a gentleness that spoke volumes beyond what words could ever convey. They remained like that for the rest of the night, connected by an understanding that transcended the boundaries between human and beast, hope and fear, curse and cure. When dawn arrived and the transformation reversed itself, Kale woke slowly, as he always did, disoriented by the shift between his two selves. But this morning, something in his expression carried a different quality, a searching curiosity as he studied Alara's face in the pale morning light. I dreamed something last night, he said slowly, his voice carrying uncertain wonder. Or perhaps remembered something, though I could not say which. Fragments of conversation, feelings I cannot fully name. Alara's heart quickened, wondering if perhaps the beast's understanding had somehow bridged the gap into Kale's waking memory. What do you remember? She asked carefully. Warmth, Kale said, his brow furrowing in concentration. Trust, and something like hope, though I could not tell you what inspired it. He looked at her then, something vulnerable and searching in his gaze. Ilara, did something happen last night? Something beyond what has become our usual routine? She considered, for a moment, whether to share the full truth of what she had discovered in the archive, what she had confessed to the beast in the darkness. The risk felt enormous, the possibility of rejection or complication weighing heavily against her desire for honesty. But she thought of Beatrice's warnings, of Varric's growing schemes, and understood that whatever time they had to build genuine trust between them might be running shorter than either of them realized. I found information about your curse, she said finally, choosing honesty despite her fear. In the archive, in an old text describing the nature of curses born from betrayed trust and genuine grief. It suggested that such curses can only be broken through love freely given, chosen without calculation or obligation, accepted equally by both the human heart and whatever darker nature the curse has created. Cale's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, disbelief, and finally, something like cautious hope, quickly suppressed, as though he feared allowing himself to trust it fully. You believe this to be true? I do not know for certain, Ilara admitted, but it aligns with everything Beatrice and the old records suggest about the nature of your affliction, and I confess, Cale, that whatever I feel toward you, toward the beast that shares your soul, it is not born from obligation or fear. It has grown, slowly and genuinely, into something I can no longer deny. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken possibility, both of them aware of the enormous weight such an admission carried, not only for their own fragile connection, but for the future of an entire kingdom, trapped beneath the shadow of a curse that had haunted it for years. I have spent so long believing myself unworthy of genuine affection, Cale said finally, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. Convinced that the beast within me made such connection impossible, that anyone who claimed to care for me did so out of duty, or fear, rather than true feeling. To hear you say this, to know that what has grown between us might be genuine, rather than calculated, it is difficult to fully comprehend. Then do not try to comprehend it fully, Ilara said gently. Simply trust it, as I am choosing to trust it, despite the uncertainty and the danger that surrounds us both. Cale reached out slowly, taking her hand in his touch gentle, despite the strength she knew he possessed even in his human form. Whatever comes next, Ilara, whatever dangers Varric or anyone else in this court might pose, I am grateful for your presence here, grateful beyond what words can properly express. As their fingers intertwined in the pale morning light, neither of them could have known how quickly the fragile peace they had built would soon be tested, nor how far Lord Varric's ambitions had already progressed, in his determination to protect his own power at any cost. But for this single, quiet moment, surrounded by the aftermath of another peaceful night, they allowed themselves simply to hope, to trust in the possibility that genuine love, freely chosen despite every obstacle placed before it, might yet prove strong enough to break a curse that had shadowed this kingdom for far too long. The morning after their quiet confession, Cale summoned his council to discuss matters of the kingdom that had been neglected during the long years of his affliction. Ilara was not invited to attend, understanding the delicate balance required between her growing closeness with the king and the formal boundaries of court protocol. She spent the hours instead in the castle gardens, one of the few places within Castle Ashgrave that still felt untouched by the shadow of the curse, tending to plants that Beatrice had shown her weeks earlier, finding a strange comfort in the simple, patient work of nurturing something toward growth. She did not know, as she knelt among the herbs and flowers, that within the council chamber, Lord Varric was laying careful groundwork for the plan he had been developing since his encounter with her in the archive. He watched the king with practiced patience, waiting for the right moment to introduce doubts that had been carefully constructed over weeks of quiet investigation. Your Majesty, Varric said, once the routine matters of the council meeting had concluded, and only he and Cale remained in the chamber. I wonder if I might raise a concern that has weighed upon me in recent days. Cale, still carrying the warmth of the morning's conversation with Ilara, regarded his advisor with more patience than he might otherwise have offered. Speak freely, Varric. You have served this court faithfully for many years. It concerns the girl Ilara, Varric began carefully, watching the king's expression for any sign of resistance before continuing. I do not doubt the genuine improvement her presence has brought to your nightly affliction. That much is undeniable, witnessed by staff throughout the castle. But I have concerns about her true origins, her true intentions, that I believe warrant investigation. What concerns? Cale asked, his tone carrying a note of caution now, though he did not dismiss the words outright. I have made inquiries, Varric said, producing a folded document from within his robes, into the circumstances of her family's fall from nobility. The debts that led to her sale were substantial, yes, but the timing raises questions. Her father's connections included several individuals with ties to rival territories, kingdoms that have long sought influence within Drakmoor's borders. I do not suggest she came here with malicious intent from the beginning, Your Majesty. But I wonder whether her presence, however genuinely helpful it has proven regarding your curse, might also serve purposes beyond what either of you currently understand. Cale took the document, scanning its contents with a furrowed brow. The information, carefully selected and subtly distorted, painted a picture of complicated family connections that, while technically accurate in isolated details, suggested implications far more sinister than the truth actually warranted. Ilara's father had indeed known men from neighboring territories, though only through common social circles, entirely innocent of any conspiracy Varric now hinted toward. This proves nothing beyond acquaintance, Cale said, though a seed of doubt had already been planted despite his attempt to dismiss it entirely. Perhaps not proof, Varric agreed smoothly, but surely worth further investigation, given the unprecedented influence she now holds over matters as sensitive as your own affliction. I would be remiss in my duty to this kingdom if I did not raise such concerns, however uncomfortable they might be to consider. Cale studied the document again, his mind torn between the trust he had built with Ilara through weeks of shared vulnerability and the nagging uncertainty Varric's carefully constructed narrative had introduced. He knew, rationally, that circumstantial connections proved nothing definitive. Yet the years of isolation, of believing himself unworthy of genuine affection, of doubting whether anyone's care for him could possibly be free from ulterior motive, made him more susceptible to such doubts than he wished to admit. I will consider your concerns, Cale said finally, setting the document aside with deliberate calm, though the words did not fully banish the unease now settling in his chest. But I will not act against Ilara without concrete evidence of wrongdoing. She has done nothing but help me, Varric, at considerable risk to herself. Of course, Your Majesty, Varric said, bowing slightly, though something satisfied flickered behind his composed expression as he withdrew from the chamber. He understood well enough that seeds of doubt, once planted, rarely required immediate proof to take root and grow. Patience, he had learned over many years of careful political maneuvering, often proved more effective than direct confrontation. That evening, when Ilara arrived for her usual visit to Cale's study before the transformation began, she noticed immediately a subtle change in his demeanor, a distance that had not existed the morning before. He greeted her politely, but the easy warmth of their recent conversations felt strained, replaced by something more guarded. Is something wrong? She asked, settling into the chair across from his desk, watching his expression carefully for clues. Varric raised some concerns today, Cale said, choosing his words carefully, about your family's connections, about individuals with ties to rival territories. Ilara's stomach tightened with unease, understanding immediately the danger such accusations represented, however unfounded they might be. My father knew many people during his time in the capital, before our fall from grace. I cannot account for every connection he maintained, nor did I have influence over the company he kept. I understand that, Cale said, though his tone carried lingering uncertainty. I do not believe you came here with malicious intent, Ilara, but I confess the accusation has unsettled me more than I expected it to. Do you truly believe I would use whatever trust we have built between us for purposes beyond genuine care? Ilara asked, hurt evident in her voice, despite her attempt to remain composed. I do not know what to believe, Cale admitted, running a hand through his hair in obvious frustration. I have spent so many years, unable to trust anyone's motives fully, always wondering whether kindness offered to me carried hidden purpose. It is difficult to fully silence those doubts, even when logic tells me they are unfounded. The conversation left Alara shaken, understanding with growing clarity the precariousness of the trust she had worked so carefully to build. Varric's carefully planted seeds of doubt had found fertile ground in Kale's own insecurities, threatening to undo weeks of genuine connection built through shared vulnerability and patient understanding. She resolved, in that moment, that she would not allow such doubts to fester unchecked. That night, as the transformation began and the familiar beast emerged from the shadows, Ilara approached with renewed determination, understanding that whatever trust existed between herself and this creature, whatever bond had grown between herself and Kale, needed to be strong enough to withstand the political machinations now working against them. "Whatever doubts have been placed in your mind," she said softly, settling beside the beast as it lowered itself to the floor near her, "I will not let them destroy what we have built together. I came to this castle in chains, sold by a father who valued his debts more than his daughter. I have no connections to rival territories beyond simple acquaintance, through circles I never chose to be part of. What I feel toward you, toward Kale, is genuine, regardless of what Lord Varric wishes others to believe." The beast regarded her with quiet attention, its amber eyes reflecting the dying firelight, and slowly, deliberately, it pressed its head against her hand in a gesture that felt, to Alara, like reassurance freely offered, despite whatever confusion the daylight hours had introduced. "We will find a way through this," she continued, more to herself than to the creature, though she found comfort in speaking the words aloud regardless. "Varric's schemes will not succeed, not if we remain steady in our trust of one another." But even as she spoke the words with conviction, Ilara understood the growing danger of her position within the castle. Lord Varric had shown himself willing to construct careful deceptions to protect his own influence, and she suspected, with unsettling certainty, that tonight's carefully planted doubts represented only the beginning of a much larger scheme still unfolding in the shadows of Castle Ashgrave's political currents. As the night wore on, and the beast eventually settled into peaceful rest beside her, Ilara found herself staring into the dying embers of the fire, contemplating the challenges that lay ahead. Whatever love had grown between herself and Kale, whatever bond connected her to the beast within him, would soon be tested more severely than either of them yet realized, as Lord Varric's careful machinations moved steadily toward their inevitable, dangerous conclusion. The seeds Lord Varric had planted continued to grow in the days that followed, spreading through the castle like a slow poison, transforming whispered admiration into whispered suspicion. Ilara noticed the shift in how servants regarded her, the way conversations fell silent when she entered rooms, the sideways glances that carried doubt where once they had carried hope. Even Beatrice, though she remained loyal and kind, could not fully hide the worry creasing her weathered features each time she visited Ilara's chambers. "Varric has been thorough," Beatrice admitted one evening, helping Ilara prepare for her nightly visit to the king's chambers. "He has spoken with half the court now, suggesting that your father's associations run deeper than simple acquaintance. Some believe him, others remain uncertain. But doubt itself is a powerful weapon, child, regardless of whether the claims behind it prove true." "I have done nothing to deserve such suspicion," Ilara said, frustration evident in her voice, despite her attempt to remain composed. "I know that," Beatrice said gently. "And I believe the king knows it as well, in his heart, even if Varric's words have introduced uncertainty he cannot fully silence. But you must understand, Ilara, the years of isolation and betrayal this curse has forced upon him have left him vulnerable to exactly this kind of manipulation. Trust does not come easily to a man who has spent so long believing himself unworthy of it." Ilara absorbed this warning with growing unease, understanding the delicate balance she now needed to maintain. She could not simply dismiss Varric's accusations without appearing defensive in ways that might further fuel suspicion. Yet she also could not allow the doubts to fester unchallenged, lest they slowly erode everything she and Kale had built together through weeks of careful, patient trust. That morning, before her usual meeting with Kale, Ilara made a decision that felt both necessary and deeply frightening. She sought out Lord Varric directly, finding him in the castle's western tower, overseeing correspondence with several regional lords whose loyalty, she suspected, he was carefully cultivating for purposes she could only guess at. "Lord Varric," she said, standing firmly in the doorway of his private study, refusing to be intimidated by the surprise that flickered across his composed features at her unexpected arrival. "I wish to speak with you directly, rather than allowing whispers and implications to continue unchecked." Varric studied her for a long moment, setting aside the papers he had been reviewing. "Lady Alara, this is unexpected. Please, sit." "I prefer to stand," Alara said, keeping her voice steady despite the nervousness churning in her stomach. "I understand you have raised concerns about my family's connections, suggesting ties to rival territories that might compromise my presence here." "I have raised questions," Varric corrected smoothly, "based on information that warranted further investigation. Nothing more." "My father knew many people during his years in the capital," Alara said. "Merchants, nobles, officials from various territories, as anyone in his position would have encountered through ordinary social circles. If such acquaintance constitutes evidence of conspiracy, then half the nobility of this kingdom stands equally suspect." Varric's expression remained carefully neutral, though something calculating flickered behind his eyes. "Perhaps you are correct, Lady Alara. Perhaps my concerns amount to nothing more than an overabundance of caution regarding matters as sensitive as the king's well-being. I mean no personal offense by raising them." "I do not believe you," Alara said bluntly, deciding that careful diplomacy had already failed to protect her, and directness might serve better. "I believe you fear what my presence means for your own influence within this court, should the king's curse ever break fully. I believe you have constructed doubts about my intentions, specifically because genuine progress threatens the power you have built during these years of his affliction." For a moment, something like surprise, quickly masked, crossed Varric's features at her boldness. Then his expression settled back into practiced composure, though his voice carried a harder edge when he finally responded. "You are perceptive, Lady Alara. I will grant you that. Perhaps more perceptive than wise, given your current position within this castle. I would advise caution in making such accusations, however accurate you might believe them to be. Accusations without proof cut both ways, and I possess considerably more influence within this court than you currently do." "Is that a threat?" Alara asked, refusing to let her voice waver, despite the fear building within her chest. "It is simply an observation," Varric said, his tone carrying deceptive mildness that did nothing to soften the underlying menace. "One I hope you will consider carefully before continuing down whatever path you currently believe yourself walking. The king's curse has existed for years, Lady Alara. It has survived attempts far more determined than yours to end it. I would not place excessive confidence in whatever progress you believe yourself to have made." Alara left the encounter shaken but resolved, understanding now with complete certainty that Varric represented a genuine and calculated threat to everything she and Kale had built together. She said nothing of the confrontation during her morning meeting with Kale, unwilling to add further complication to an already strained situation, though she found herself watching him more carefully throughout their conversation, searching for any lingering trace of the doubts Varric's earlier words had introduced. Kale, for his part, seemed determined to push past the uncertainty, engaging with her in conversation that felt almost like their earlier warmth, though a subtle guardedness remained beneath the surface that had not existed before Varric's intervention. Alara recognized the effort he was making, appreciated it even, while understanding that genuine trust, once shaken, required more than simple willpower to fully restore. That night, as the transformation began and the beast emerged once more from the shadows, Alara found herself facing a creature that seemed, for the first time in weeks, slightly more agitated than usual, as though some echo of the daylight tension had carried through into the darker hours as well. "I know things feel uncertain right now," she said softly, approaching with the same careful patience she had cultivated since her very first night in this chamber. "But I promise you, whatever doubts Lord Varric has tried to plant, they do not reflect the truth of what exists between us." The beast regarded her with unusual wariness, pacing rather than settling immediately beside her, as had become its custom in recent weeks. Alara felt a flicker of fear, wondering if the political tension building around them might somehow be affecting the fragile trust she had worked so hard to establish with this creature as well. She sat quietly, patient despite her unease, waiting for the beast to find its own way toward the calm connection they had built together over so many nights. Slowly, gradually, as the hours passed, the creature's agitation eased, and it eventually settled beside her, though something in its posture suggested lingering uncertainty that had not existed before. "We will overcome this," Elara whispered, resting her hand against its dark fur, feeling the steady rhythm of its breathing beneath her palm. "Whatever schemes Lord Varric continues to construct, they will not succeed in destroying what we have built here, night after night, through genuine trust and patient understanding." But even as she spoke the words with conviction, a seed of her own doubt had begun to take root, small but persistent, wondering whether the growing pressure from the castle's political currents might eventually prove too strong for even the most genuine connection to withstand. She pushed the thought aside as best she could, focusing instead on the quiet comfort of the beast's presence beside her, though she understood, with growing certainty, that the coming days would test the strength of everything she and Kale had built together, far more severely than anything they had yet faced. Unknown to either of them, in a chamber elsewhere within Castle Ashgrave's shadowed halls, Lord Varric was already finalizing plans that would soon bring the carefully constructed doubts to a dramatic and dangerous culmination, one that would threaten not only Elara's fragile position within the court, but her very life within the walls of the castle she had come to think of, however uncertainly, as something resembling home. The blow, when it finally fell, arrived with a speed that left Elara no time to prepare. She was summoned to the great hall on a gray morning, the formal chamber where the king held audiences and addressed matters of state before the full assembly of his court. She had never been called to such a gathering before, and the moment she stepped through the tall doors and saw the crowded room, the guards positioned at intervals along the walls, and Lord Varric standing near the throne with an expression of grave satisfaction, she understood immediately that something terrible was about to unfold. Kale sat upon the throne, his face pale and troubled, refusing to meet her eyes, as she was led forward by two guards who gripped her arms with unusual firmness. Elara's heart pounded as she scanned the room, searching for some explanation, some warning of what was about to happen. "Lady Elara," Varric announced, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall, "you stand accused of conspiracy against the crown, of using your position within this castle to gather information intended for delivery to enemies of this kingdom." Gasps rippled through the assembled court, and Elara felt the blood drain from her face as she understood, with sudden horrifying clarity, the full extent of Varric's scheme. "This is false," she said, her voice trembling despite her attempt to remain composed. "I have done nothing but try to help end the king's suffering." "And yet," Varric continued, producing a folded letter from within his robes, "we have discovered correspondence bearing your family's seal, addressed to representatives of a rival territory, detailing sensitive information about the castle's defenses and the king's vulnerable condition during his nightly transformation." The letter was presented to the court, and Elara stared at it in disbelief, recognizing immediately that it was a forgery, though skillfully constructed enough that she understood the danger of trying to disprove it before an audience already primed by weeks of carefully cultivated suspicion. "I did not write this," she said desperately, looking toward Kale, silently pleading for him to see the truth of her denial. "Kale, please, you must believe me." Kale's expression carried visible anguish, torn between the trust they had built together and the damning evidence now presented before his entire court. "Elara," he said, his voice strained, "I want to believe you. But this evidence, if genuine, represents a threat to this entire kingdom that I cannot simply dismiss based on personal feeling." "It is not genuine," Elara insisted, though she could see the doubt Varric's careful manipulation had sown, taking deeper root with each passing moment. "Lord Varric has fabricated this to protect his own influence, to prevent your curse from ever being broken, because he fears what my presence here truly threatens, which is his continued control over your decisions during these years of your affliction." "A bold accusation," Varric said smoothly, "from a woman facing evidence of her own treachery. I would suggest, Your Majesty, that her desperate attempts to shift blame only confirm the seriousness of the situation we face." The court murmured its agreement, swayed by Varric's carefully constructed narrative and the visible evidence he had presented, however false its origins truly were. Kale sat in tense silence, his hands gripping the arms of his throne, clearly wrestling with a decision he did not wish to make, but felt compelled by his duty to consider seriously. "Take her to the tower," Cale said finally, his voice heavy with reluctance and pain. "She will remain there while we investigate the truth of these accusations further. I will not act rashly, but neither can I ignore evidence of this magnitude without proper examination." Alara felt her world collapsing as the guards led her from the hall, their grip firm, despite her attempts to maintain some dignity in the face of such devastating betrayal. She looked back once, catching Cale's eyes across the crowded room, seeing in his expression a torment that matched her own, though it did nothing to prevent the guards from continuing their march toward the tower that would become her prison. The tower chamber was cold and sparse, a stone room with a single barred window overlooking the mountains that had once seemed so beautiful during her earlier days at the castle. Now they felt like nothing more than a reminder of how trapped she had become, how quickly the fragile trust and love she had built with Cale could be shattered by Lord Varric's calculated cruelty. Beatrice visited her that evening, her weathered face carrying deep worry, as she brought a small meal that Alara had no appetite to eat. "This is Varric's doing," Beatrice confirmed quietly, glancing toward the door to ensure they were not overheard. "The letter is a forgery, skillfully constructed, but a forgery nonetheless. I have served this castle long enough to recognize his methods, though proving it before the full court will prove considerably more difficult." "What will happen to me?" Alara asked, fear and exhaustion evident in her trembling voice. "I do not know," Beatrice admitted honestly. "The king is troubled, torn between his feelings for you and the political pressure Varric has constructed around this accusation. I fear, without concrete evidence to disprove the letter's authenticity, the court may demand more severe punishment than simple imprisonment." The word hung heavy in the air between them, and Alara felt tears finally breaking free from the composure she had struggled to maintain throughout the terrible day. "I never wanted any of this," she whispered. "Not the influence, not the danger, only to help him, to help both of them, find some way free from the curse that has haunted this castle for so many years." "I know that, child," Beatrice said gently, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "And in my heart, I believe the king knows it as well. Even now, even with doubt clouding his judgment. But belief and proof remain different things, and Varric has proven himself a formidable adversary in constructing exactly the kind of evidence needed to poison that trust." As night fell over the castle, Alara remained alone in her tower prison, listening to the distant sounds of the castle settling into its usual evening routine, knowing that somewhere within those walls, the transformation would soon claim Cale once more, and that for the first time in weeks, she would not be present to offer the calm companionship that had brought such peace to his nights. She wondered, with growing dread, what would happen when the beast emerged to find her absent, whether the progress they had built together might unravel entirely without her presence to maintain it, whether Varric's scheme had been calculated not only to destroy her position within the court, but to undo the very foundation of hope that had begun to challenge his carefully protected influence. The hours passed slowly, marked only by the distant howling wind against the tower's stone walls and the growing ache of uncertainty in Alara's chest. She thought of the beast, alone now in that familiar chamber, perhaps confused, perhaps agitated by her sudden absence after so many nights of steady companionship. She thought of Cale, torn between duty and genuine feeling, forced to make an impossible choice based on evidence carefully constructed to deceive him. And beneath all of it, she thought of Lord Varric, somewhere within the castle's shadowed halls, likely satisfied with the success of his carefully orchestrated betrayal, believing perhaps that he had finally secured his position against the threat her presence had represented to his years of quiet, calculated control. But Alara refused to surrender entirely to despair, holding on to a fragile thread of hope that the truth, however carefully buried beneath Varric's deceptions, might yet find its way to light before it was too late. She did not know how such truth would emerge, nor how much time remained before the court's judgment turned irreversibly against her. But she held on to that hope regardless, understanding that it might be the only thing standing between herself and a fate she dared not fully imagine, as the long, uncertain night stretched endlessly before her within the cold stone walls of her unexpected prison. 3 days passed within the confines of Alara's tower prison, each one stretching longer than the last, marked by uncertainty and the growing ache of separation from everything she had built at Castle Ashgrave. Beatrice visited when she could, bringing news of the court's ongoing deliberations, though little of what she reported offered genuine comfort. Lord Varric continued pressing his advantage, calling for swift judgment before the forged evidence could be properly examined by anyone capable of exposing its fraudulent origins. On the third night, as Alara sat huddled near the narrow window of her cell, watching the distant lights of the castle flicker against the darkness, she heard the beast's distant roar echo across the mountain, carrying a rage and desperation unlike anything she had witnessed during her weeks of careful companionship with the creature. Her heart clenched with worry, understanding that her absence had indeed disturbed the fragile peace they had built together, leaving Kale's darker nature to face the transformation without the calming presence that had steadied it for so many nights. She did not know that, far below in the castle's oldest chambers, a woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of sorrow had appeared before the startled guards stationed at the castle gates, demanding audience with the king regarding a matter of utmost urgency concerning the curse that bound him. The woman was Morwenna, the very witch whose ancient grief had woven the curse into Kale's bloodline so many years before. She had watched from a distance, through methods known only to those versed in old magic, the events unfolding within Castle Ashgrave, and something in the genuine connection she had witnessed between Alara and the beast had stirred within her a complicated mixture of hope and reluctant reconsideration regarding the punishment she had inflicted so long ago. Guards escorted her, wary and uncertain, to the great hall where Kale sat alone, exhausted and troubled, having spent the previous days wrestling with a decision that weighed increasingly heavy upon his conscience. He looked up in surprise as the silver-haired woman entered, something in her presence immediately recognizable, despite the years that had passed since he had last encountered anyone connected to the curse's dark origins. "You do not know me," Morwenna said, her voice carrying the weight of ancient sorrow, "though you have lived beneath the shadow of my grief for many years now." Kale rose slowly from his throne, understanding immediately who stood before him. "You are the witch, the one my father wronged." "I am," Morwenna confirmed, "and I have come to speak of a matter that concerns the fate of the girl you currently hold imprisoned within your tower, and the truth behind the accusations that led to her captivity." Kale's expression shifted through surprise and cautious hope. "You know something of this? Of Varric's evidence against her?" "I know that the letter presented before your court bears no trace of genuine magic or authentic seal," Morwenna said, "only the careful craft of a skilled forger, motivated by ambition rather than any genuine threat to your kingdom. I have watched this castle for many years, Your Majesty, curious whether my curse would ever find resolution, or whether it would simply continue destroying innocent lives indefinitely. What I witnessed between the girl and the creature you become each night was unlike anything I expected to see." "What do you mean?" Kale asked, moving closer, desperate for any information that might help him navigate the impossible situation Varric's scheme had created. "Genuine connection," Morwenna said simply. "Trust freely given, without calculation or fear, exactly the condition required to break the curse I placed upon your bloodline so many years ago. I confess, I did not expect to witness such a thing, nor did I expect the reluctant hope it has stirred within me regarding the punishment I inflicted in my grief." Kale's breath caught, understanding the magnitude of what Morwenna was telling him. "Then the curse can truly be broken, through what exists between myself and Alara." "Perhaps," Morwenna said carefully, "though I sense your advisor's scheme has introduced doubt and fear into a connection that required trust to flourish. Genuine love cannot survive indefinitely under the weight of manufactured suspicion and betrayal, Your Majesty. If you wish to see this curse broken, you must act quickly to restore what Lord Varric has worked so carefully to destroy." The revelation struck Kale with the force of sudden, painful clarity. He had allowed doubt, however reluctantly, to cloud his judgment regarding Alara's innocence, had permitted political pressure to override the genuine trust they had built together through weeks of shared vulnerability. Shame flooded through him as he understood the depth of the mistake he had nearly allowed to unfold. "I must speak with her immediately," he said, already moving toward the door. And I must expose the truth of Varric's deception before this entire court, before further harm comes to someone who has done nothing but try to help me. There is little time, Morwenna warned, following him through the castle's darkened corridors. The transformation approaches, and without her steadying presence, the creature within you grows increasingly volatile. Whatever confrontation must occur, it should happen swiftly, before darkness fully claims you once more. Kale moved with renewed purpose through the castle, guards and servants startled by his sudden urgency as he made his way toward the tower, where Alara remained imprisoned. He found Beatrice already there, having come to check on the prisoner's well-being, her expression carrying surprise at his unexpected arrival. "Release her," Kale commanded, his voice carrying an authority that had been notably absent during the days of uncertain deliberation. "Immediately." "Your Majesty," Beatrice said, relief evident in her voice as she moved to unlock the heavy door. "Has something changed?" "Everything has changed," Kale said, stepping into the small cell where Alara sat, pale and exhausted, though her eyes lit with cautious hope at the sight of him. "Alara, I am sorry. Sorry beyond what words can properly express, for allowing doubt to cloud what I know, in my heart, has always been genuine between us." Alara rose slowly, uncertain whether to trust this sudden shift after days of painful separation and uncertainty. "What has happened?" "Morwenna has come," Kale explained quickly, gesturing toward the silver-haired witch who had followed him to the tower's threshold. "The witch who cursed my bloodline all those years ago. She has confirmed that Varric's evidence against you is entirely fabricated, and more than that, she has confirmed what I should have trusted from the beginning, that what exists between us holds the genuine power to break this curse forever." Alara's eyes filled with tears, relief and lingering hurt mixing together as she processed the sudden reversal of everything she had feared during her days of imprisonment. "You believed him, even briefly. You allowed doubt to overshadow what we had built." "I did," Kale admitted, shame evident in his voice, "and I understand if that betrayal has damaged your trust in me beyond easy repair. But I am here now, Alara, choosing you, choosing us, over whatever political pressure Varric continues to construct against us. I only hope it is not too late to prove that choice genuine." Before Alara could respond, a low, agonized roar echoed through the castle's stone corridors, closer now, carrying a desperation that made everyone in the small tower room freeze with sudden alarm. "The transformation has begun," Morwenna said grimly. "And without proper preparation, without Alara's steadying presence from the very start, the creature's rage may prove more dangerous than any of us have witnessed before." Kale's expression hardened with sudden urgency. "We must go to him, to it, immediately, before Varric's scheme costs us everything we have worked so carefully to build." Together, they rushed from the tower, racing through the castle's darkening corridors toward the chamber, where the transformation was already well underway, uncertain what dangerous confrontation awaited them, but understanding, with growing clarity, that the fate of the curse, the kingdom, and everything Alara and Kale had built together, now hung precariously in the balance of whatever happened next. They arrived at the heavy iron doors just as another furious roar shook the walls, the sound carrying a rage and torment far beyond anything Alara had witnessed during her weeks of careful companionship with the beast. Guards stood frozen nearby, too frightened to approach, their faces pale with the memory of what these chambers had been like before Alara's presence had brought unexpected peace to the king's nightly affliction. "Stand back," Kale ordered the guards, though his own voice carried uncertainty about what they would find inside. He turned to Alara, his expression urgent. "Are you certain you wish to enter? Without the calm you have always brought from the very start of the transformation, the beast may be far more dangerous than you have ever faced." "I am certain," Alara said, steadying herself despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Whatever has happened these past 3 days, whatever damage Varric's scheme has caused, I will not abandon him now, not when we are so close to breaking this curse forever." Morwenna stepped forward as well, her ancient eyes carrying grave concern. "I will accompany you both. If the curse is truly to break tonight, my presence may be needed to guide its resolution, having been the one who wove it into existence so many years ago." Together, the three of them pushed through the heavy iron doors, entering the chamber to find chaos far beyond what Alara had ever witnessed. Furniture lay shattered across the stone floor, deep gouges scored the walls, and in the center of the destruction stood the beast, larger and more agitated than she had ever seen it, its amber eyes wild with confusion and rage, as it turned toward the sudden intrusion. For a terrible moment, Alara feared that 3 days of separation, compounded by the pain of betrayal Kale's doubt had introduced, might have undone every fragile bit of trust they had built together. The beast's massive form tensed, a low growl building in its throat, as it studied the intruders with none of the recognition it had shown so many nights before. "It is me," Alara said softly, stepping forward despite Kale's instinctive move to hold her back. "I know I have been absent these past days, though not by choice. Please, remember what we built together, night after night, before all of this happened." The beast's growl intensified, its claws raking against the stone floor as it took a threatening step forward, clearly caught in a storm of confusion and betrayed trust that Alara's simple words could not immediately dispel. Kale moved instinctively between them, though even he understood the terrible irony of his own body serving as both threat and potential victim in this dangerous confrontation. "Alara," Kale said urgently, "perhaps this is too dangerous. The beast does not recognize the calm we built together. 3 days without your presence, combined with the shock of Varric's betrayal, may have undone everything." "I do not believe that," Alara said, though her voice trembled with genuine fear as she continued moving carefully toward the agitated creature. "What we built together was not so fragile as to be destroyed by mere days of separation. I trust it, Kale. I trust him. I trust us." She extended her hand slowly, exactly as she had done on that very first terrifying night, so many weeks before, offering the same open, unguarded gesture, despite the far greater danger the beast's current agitation represented. The creature froze, staring at her outstretched palm with an intensity that carried both threat and, buried beneath the surface rage, something that might have been recognition struggling to break through. "I never abandoned you," Alara said softly, tears filling her eyes as she continued her slow approach. "I was taken from you, imprisoned by lies constructed to destroy what we built together. But I am here now, choosing you, choosing this, exactly as I have chosen every night since that very first evening, when I refused to run from you." The beast trembled, caught between the residual rage of days spent alone with only confusion and abandonment to fuel its darker nature, and the deep, buried memory of gentle trust that Alara's presence had cultivated over so many patient weeks. Slowly, impossibly, it lowered its massive head, pressing its snout against her outstretched hand, exactly as it had done that very first night, the violent tension in its powerful frame beginning, gradually, to ease. "That is it," Alara whispered, relief flooding through her, as she felt the familiar warmth of the creature's acceptance returning. "Yes, exactly that. We are together again, exactly as we should be." Morwenna watched the reunion with growing wonder, understanding that she was witnessing something rare and powerful, genuine love strong enough to withstand betrayal, separation, and manufactured doubt, exactly the condition required to break a curse rooted in similarly betrayed trust so many years before. "The curse recognizes what stands before it," Morwenna said softly, moving closer with careful reverence. "Genuine love, freely chosen despite every obstacle placed against it. This is the moment, if ever there was one, for the binding to finally release." She raised her hands, ancient words flowing from her lips, in a language Alara did not recognize, though she felt the air around them shift and thicken with something powerful and old. The beast, still pressed gently against Alara's palm, began to glow faintly, a soft golden light spreading from where their connection remained unbroken, despite the chaos of recent days. Kale watched in stunned silence as the transformation, always violent and painful in reverse, began to shift into something entirely different, gentler, guided not by the harsh magic of the original curse, but by whatever power Morwenna now channeled through her ancient words and the genuine bond witnessed before her. The beast's form began to shrink slowly, its dark fur receding, its powerful frame reshaping itself with none of the agonized violence that had always accompanied the transformation before. Ilara kept her hand pressed against the creature throughout the entire process, refusing to break the connection even as it shifted and changed beneath her touch, until finally, where the massive beast had stood only moments before, Kale knelt on the stone floor, human and whole, his breathing steady rather than ragged, his expression carrying wonder rather than the usual pained exhaustion. "It is done," Morwenna said softly, lowering her hands as the golden light faded slowly from the chamber. "The curse I wove so many years ago in grief and anger has finally released, broken by exactly the condition required from the very beginning. Love chosen freely, despite every obstacle placed against it." Kale looked up at Ilara, disbelief and joy mixing across his exhausted features. "It is truly over? I will not transform again?" "The curse recognized genuine love," Morwenna confirmed. "Tested by betrayal, by separation, by manufactured doubt, and still it remained strong enough to see you through the transformation gently rather than violently. Such love does not simply satisfy a curse's conditions, it dissolves the very foundation upon which such magic was built." Overwhelmed with emotion, Kale rose slowly and pulled Ilara into an embrace, both of them trembling with the release of tension that had built across weeks of uncertainty and days of painful separation. "I am sorry," he whispered against her hair. "Sorry for ever doubting you, even briefly, even under such carefully constructed pressure." "You came back to me," Ilara said softly, holding him just as tightly. "That is what matters now. That, and the fact that this curse, this terrible affliction that has haunted you, and this entire kingdom for years, has finally been broken." Their reunion was interrupted by the arrival of guards, drawn by the earlier commotion, and among them, pale with sudden alarm, Lord Varric himself, having heard whispers throughout the castle of Morwenna's arrival, and the confrontation now unfolding within the king's chambers. His expression shifted from confusion to horror as he took in the scene before him, Kale, standing whole and human despite the darkness outside, Ilara free from her tower imprisonment, and Morwenna standing witness to what could only mean his carefully constructed scheme had entirely unraveled. "This is impossible," Varric said, his composed facade finally cracking under the weight of his scheme's collapse. "The curse cannot simply be broken, not like this, not by her." "And yet it has been," Kale said, releasing Ilara only enough to turn toward his former advisor, with an expression that carried none of the exhausted uncertainty that had allowed Varric's manipulation to succeed for so long. "Along with the exposure of your treachery, Lord Varric. Morwenna herself has confirmed the letter presented, as evidence against Ilara, was nothing more than skillful forgery, constructed to protect your own influence at the cost of an innocent woman's freedom, and very nearly the cost of this entire kingdom's chance at breaking a curse that has haunted it for years." Varric's expression shifted rapidly through denial and calculation, searching for some escape from the trap that had suddenly closed around him. But the guards, having witnessed the entire exchange, moved to restrain him before he could attempt any further deception or flight. "Take him to the tower," Kale commanded, his voice carrying newfound authority and clarity that had been absent during the exhausted years of his affliction. "He will face proper judgment for his crimes against the crown, and against an innocent woman who did nothing but offer genuine compassion where fear and calculation had ruled for far too long." As Varric was led away, still protesting his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence now arrayed against him, Kale turned back to Ilara, his expression softening once more into the warmth she had come to treasure during their weeks of careful, growing trust. "You have given me my life back," he said quietly, taking her hands in his. "Not only freedom from the curse, but the chance to be whole again, to rule this kingdom with clarity, rather than the constant shadow of fear and destruction that has haunted every night for years." "We gave each other something," Ilara corrected gently. "Trust, chosen freely, despite every reason to doubt it. That is what broke the curse, Kale. Not simply my presence, but the genuine choice we both made, again and again, to trust in what we were building together." News of the curse's breaking spread quickly through the castle and beyond, carried by grateful servants and astonished guards to every corner of the kingdom. What had once been a place shadowed by fear and destruction slowly transformed, in the weeks that followed, into a court filled with genuine hope and celebration, as Kale worked tirelessly to restore proper governance to a kingdom that had suffered for years beneath the weight of his affliction. Ilara, once sold into slavery by a father who valued debt over devotion, found herself elevated to a position she could never have imagined during those dark days in the auction market, standing beside Kale as his chosen partner, his equal in every meaningful sense, having proven through genuine sacrifice and unwavering trust that love freely given held power enough to break even the most powerful and painful of curses. On a bright morning some months later, beneath skies clear of the mist that had once perpetually shadowed Castle Ashgrave, Ilara stood before the assembled court, dressed not in the plain white gown of an offering, but in robes befitting the queen she was about to become. Kale stood beside her, his eyes carrying none of the haunted exhaustion that had marked their first meeting, only genuine joy and gratitude for the woman who had refused to run when every instinct told her to flee. As the ceremony concluded, and cheers erupted throughout the great hall, Ilara caught Beatrice's eye among the crowd, the older woman's weathered face alight with tears of genuine happiness. She thought of the long journey that had brought her to this moment, the chains and fear of that first terrible cart ride, the glowing amber eyes in the darkness that had, against every expectation, led not to destruction, but to genuine, transformative love. The slave girl who had once been sold for her father's debts now stood crowned as queen, having tamed not merely a beast, but broken a curse that had haunted an entire kingdom, proving that even in the darkest circumstances, genuine courage and unwavering trust could illuminate a path toward healing that no one, not even those who suffered most beneath the curse's shadow, had dared to fully believe possible.